The year is 48 BCE, and the most powerful man in the world, Julius Caesar, stands in the royal palace of Alexandria, surrounded by the opulence of Egyptian gold and marble, when suddenly a large carpet is unrolled at his feet, and from within emerges a young woman of 21 whose entrance will change the course of history forever. This is Cleopatra VII, and while countless paintings, films, and legends have reduced her to nothing more than a seductress with a beautiful face, the truth is far more extraordinary, far more complex, and far more impressive than any Hollywood dramatization could ever capture. For 2,000 years, history has obsessed over Cleopatra's appearance, her romantic liaisons, her tragic death by asp bite. But what if we'd been asking the wrong questions all along? What if the real story isn't about whether she was beautiful, but about how she wielded intelligence, linguistic mastery, political cunning, and strategic brilliance to keep Egypt independent for over 2 decades, while the Roman Republic devoured every other Hellenistic kingdom around her? Born in 69 BCE into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek family that had ruled Egypt since the time of Alexander the Great's generals, Cleopatra inherited a kingdom that was already crumbling, already a shadow of its former glory, already circled by Roman vultures waiting for the right moment to strike. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was so weak and so despised that he had to bribe Roman politicians with massive sums just to keep his throne. And when Cleopatra ascended to power alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, in 51 BCE, Egypt was drowning in debt, torn apart by internal conflicts, threatened by famine, and viewed by Rome as little more than a rich prize waiting to be claimed. The traditional narrative tells us that Cleopatra seduced her way to power, that she used her feminine wiles to manipulate Caesar and later Mark Antony. But this interpretation reveals more about the misogyny of ancient Roman propagandists and modern historians than it does about the historical reality. Consider the facts.
Cleopatra spoke at least 9 languages fluently, including Egyptian, something no other Ptolemaic ruler had bothered to learn in 3 centuries of Greek rule, which meant she could communicate directly with her subjects without translators, reading sacred texts, conducting diplomatic negotiations, and speaking with foreign ambassadors in their native tongues. She was educated in mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and medicine at a time when such knowledge was reserved for the elite intellectual circles of the ancient world. She understood economics well enough to manage Egypt's complex grain production system, the lifeblood of her nation's wealth and Rome's hunger. She studied rhetoric and debate, mastering the art of persuasion not through physical beauty, but through the power of her words and arguments. When her brother's advisors drove her out of Alexandria in a palace coup, she didn't retreat in defeat. She raised an army, and it was during this period of civil war that Caesar arrived in Egypt, pursuing his rival Pompey after the Battle of Pharsalus. The famous carpet incident, whether literally true or embellished over time, demonstrates not seduction, but audacious political theater. Cleopatra needed to bypass her brother's forces and reach Caesar before his advisors could poison him against her, so she smuggled herself into his presence in a way that was bold, memorable, and impossible to ignore. What happened next wasn't a love affair born of physical attraction, but a political partnership forged by mutual benefit. Caesar needed Egyptian wealth and grain to consolidate his power in Rome, and Cleopatra needed Roman military might to defeat her brother and secure her throne. She impressed Caesar not with batting eyelashes, but with her intellect, her knowledge of regional politics, her understanding of Roman power dynamics, and her vision for Egypt's future. Together, they defeated Ptolemy XIII, who drowned in the Nile during the Alexandrian War, and Cleopatra emerged as the sole ruler of Egypt, though she nominally shared power with her even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. She bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, but this too should be understood in political terms. By giving Caesar an heir, she tied Egypt's future to Rome's most powerful man, creating a dynastic link that could protect her kingdom. When she followed Caesar to Rome, she came not as a mistress seeking favor, but as a foreign monarch conducting diplomatic relations, and her presence in the city scandalized the Roman Senate, not because she was beautiful, but because she represented everything conservative Romans feared: Eastern luxury, monarchical power, and the dangerous idea that Rome's republic might be transforming into something else entirely. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Cleopatra faced her greatest test. The man who had been her protector was dead. Rome was plunging into civil war once again, and Egypt stood vulnerable to whoever emerged victorious from the chaos. Mark Antony, one of the triumvirs dividing Roman territories after Caesar's death, summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus in 41 BCE, intending to interrogate her about her loyalty and possibly demand tribute. What happened at Tarsus has been immortalized in legend: Cleopatra arriving on a golden barge with purple sails, dressed as the goddess Venus, surrounded by attendants costumed as cupids and nymphs. But once again, we must look past the theatrical staging to see the political genius underneath. Cleopatra understood propaganda, understood that Antony, like all Romans, was impressed by displays of wealth and power, understood that she needed to demonstrate Egypt's prosperity and cultural sophistication to establish herself as an equal partner rather than a subjugated client. The relationship that developed between Cleopatra and Antony was indeed romantic, producing 3 children and lasting over a decade until their deaths, but it was fundamentally a political alliance between 2 leaders who needed each other desperately. Antony required Egyptian resources, grain, and wealth to challenge Octavian for control of the Roman world, while Cleopatra needed Antony's legions to protect Egypt and expand her territorial holdings. Through her alliance with Antony, Cleopatra managed to recover lands that had been stripped from Egypt by previous Roman interventions, including parts of Crete, Cyprus, and the Levantine coast, a stunning reversal of Egypt's declining power and a testament to her diplomatic skill. She established herself as a living goddess in Egyptian religious tradition, while simultaneously presenting herself as a Hellenistic monarch to her Greek subjects and a worthy ally to Rome's eastern provinces. She built temples, sponsored artistic and intellectual projects, and maintained Alexandria as one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. The famous Library of Alexandria, the Mausoleum, the Pharos Lighthouse, all flourished under her patronage. She managed her kingdom's economy brilliantly, understanding that Egypt's agricultural wealth, particularly its grain production, was her greatest strategic asset in dealing with Rome. But while Cleopatra was building her power in the east, Octavian was consolidating his position in Rome, and he recognized that Antony and Cleopatra represented a mortal threat to his ambitions. Octavian couldn't attack Antony directly without appearing to restart Rome's civil wars, so he did something far more clever. He launched a propaganda campaign against Cleopatra, portraying her not as a legitimate monarch and political leader, but as a dangerous foreign seductress who had bewitched and corrupted Mark Antony, turning him against Rome itself. Roman writers described her as a drunken, incestuous, power-mad Oriental despot who planned to make Rome bow before her throne in Alexandria. They claimed she had enslaved Antony's mind with drugs and sexual manipulation, that she planned to destroy Roman values and traditions, that she represented everything decadent and dangerous about the East. This propaganda was so effective that it has echoed through 2,000 years of history, shaping how we view Cleopatra even today. When war finally came, it culminated in the naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian's forces defeated the combined fleets of Antony and Cleopatra. Ancient sources claim Cleopatra fled during the battle and Antony abandoned his fleet to follow her, but modern historians suggest this may have been a strategic retreat that was later rewritten by Octavian's propagandists as cowardice and besotted foolishness. Regardless, the defeat was catastrophic, and when Octavian's forces invaded Egypt the following year, Cleopatra knew her options were exhausted. In her final days, she negotiated desperately to save her children, to preserve some measure of Egyptian independence, to secure any terms that might salvage something from the wreckage of her ambitions. When those negotiations failed, and Antony received false news of her death, leading him to commit suicide, Cleopatra faced her end with the same dramatic flair that had characterized her life. She dressed in her royal regalia, arranged herself on a golden couch, and died by poisoning, possibly from an asp or more likely from a concealed poison she had tested on prisoners to ensure it would be quick and painless. Octavian wanted to parade her through Rome in chains as part of his triumph, the ultimate humiliation for a foreign enemy, but Cleopatra denied him that victory by choosing the time and manner of her own death, maintaining her dignity and her agency until the very last moment. So was Cleopatra a master politician or just a legendary beauty? The question itself is a trap, reflecting the same false dichotomy that ancient Roman propaganda created to diminish her achievements. The truth is that Cleopatra was one of the most skilled political operators of her age, who understood power in all its dimensions: military, economic, cultural, religious, and yes, even sexual, and who used every tool available to her to pursue her ultimate goal: preserving Egyptian independence in an age when Rome was swallowing the entire Hellenistic world. She kept Egypt free for 22 years after ascending to the throne, far longer than anyone could have reasonably expected given the kingdom's weakness and Rome's insatiable expansion. She allied with the two most powerful Romans of her age, not through beauty, but through offering them something they desperately needed: wealth, grain, military support, and legitimacy in the East. She was multilingual, highly educated, economically astute, and willing to take enormous risks when circumstances demanded it. The fact that history has reduced her to a seductress, that her political genius has been overshadowed by gossip about her love life, that her very real accomplishments have been attributed to the men she supposedly manipulated rather than to her own abilities, all of this tells us more about the enduring power of propaganda and the historical tendency to diminish powerful women than it does about who Cleopatra actually was. When Roman writers wanted to attack Antony, they couldn't admit that he had formed a rational political alliance with a capable foreign ruler, so they invented the story of the bewitching seductress, and that story proved so compelling, so useful for explaining how a Roman could apparently choose Egypt over Rome, that it has survived for 2 millennia. But if we look past the propaganda, past the Hollywood dramatizations, past the paintings of Elizabeth Taylor emerging from milk baths, we find something far more interesting: a woman who spoke 9 languages when most rulers barely mastered 2, who read Egyptian hieroglyphics when her Greek ancestors had ruled Egypt for 3 centuries without bothering to learn the native script, who managed a complex economy and maintained a powerful kingdom during an age of Roman expansion, who understood that power came not just from armies and gold, but from culture, religion, diplomacy, and the ability to craft a compelling narrative about oneself. Cleopatra wasn't just politically skilled despite being beautiful. That formulation still accepts the premise that beauty and intelligence are somehow opposed. Rather, Cleopatra understood that in the ancient world, as in ours, image and substance, theater and policy, personal charisma and political acumen were all tools in the arsenal of power, and she wielded them all with a skill that kept Egypt independent until the very moment when the entire Hellenistic world fell to Rome. The real question isn't whether Cleopatra was beautiful or brilliant, it's why we're still so uncomfortable with the idea that she was both, and why we've spent 2,000 years trying to reduce one of history's most accomplished political leaders to nothing more than a pretty face.